Joining me now is U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley. Senator Merkley, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
We're speaking with you a day after a federal agent shot two people in East Portland. What is your reaction to what happened?
You know, I was on the plane flying home, and so I received this while I was texting on the plane. I was just shocked. Coming the day after Minneapolis, and the location at Adventist Hospital is just blocks from my house in Far East Portland. And I thought, how does this keep happening time and time again? And of course, it raises all sorts of issues related to the administration's immigration policy and the way that they're executing, often terrorizing our communities.
Still in the very early stages of this investigation, and unlike what happened in Minneapolis, where you have so many videos of what happened, we haven't actually seen what happened here. But what can you tell us about anything you've learned regarding what happened in Portland?
Well, what we've heard from the administration is their version of events, that these two individuals were being stopped by the Customs and Border Protection, that it was a planned stop, that they had connections to a Venezuelan gang, and that they had weaponized their car and drove at an agent. Those words, by the way, are just an exact echo of the words that were used in Minneapolis. And we have lost trust in the administration to give us the straight scoop on anything. And that is because time and time again, they've put forward a story that is rapidly proved to be false. Now, this story may be absolutely accurate. We don't know. And there are no videos as to what happened at that location. The investigation is so important. It's so important that we have our state and local officials involved in that investigation. I really applaud our Attorney General of the state for saying that he's going to look into the behavior and see what can be learned about these agents to see if they were following the law. But we know way too little at this point, and an intense investigation with transparency and accountability is incredibly important.
You've mentioned that you want that thorough investigation. We talked to the local DA about that. He said that's a priority of his. How will you ensure that the federal government complete a thorough investigation here?
Well, that is a challenge because it's the executive branch, and you do not have a compelling lever from the U.S. Senate. We have the ability to change laws, but we do not have a Republican majority in the Senate that wants to change laws. We have the ability to do oversight hearings, but there have been precious few oversight hearings. For example, in regard to the military action in the Gulf of, or in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific regarding Venezuela, that's been going on for 4 months. There's not been a single hearing, not one. And so no oversight, little desire to, if you will, improve how the operations are going forward. So we have the role of trying to bring as much voice to the public about what's going on, including like interviews like this. And I'll be meeting with the local officials. We'll be communicating with constituents. I'll be doing town halls. But we bring as much transparency as we possibly can. But so much in a government depends on the integrity of the executive branch, and that's what we're lacking.
You mentioned the people shot in Portland. The Department of Homeland Security alleges they were connected to that Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua. What knowledge do you have about the involvement of that gang, that organization, in the United States at present day?
Well, we don't have an extensive knowledge. I don't serve on the Committee on Homeland Security, but I don't believe that committee's even held hearings to try to get to the bottom of that kind of question. We certainly know that in the past there have been gangs that have formed in the United States. That is, of course, one of the things that we have the FBI for, is to look into those domestic criminal associations, from a mafia to a gang, and try to help state and local officials take on those criminal elements. But so often we are talking about ordinary members of our community who are mistreated. Let me give you some examples. We have Jackie Merlos, who is here documented. She is a businesswoman. She has had a business with her husband, and she was arrested for trying to smuggle her sister into the United States. And in fact, she was actually just holding a meeting at the International Park at the border that is intended for that purpose. No actual charges were ever filed, and yet she was detained for 4 months. Maxine Dexter, the congresswoman here, supported and backed by Senator Wyden and myself, really elevated her case. She had 4 American citizen children who were detained in prison for weeks before they were released. We're talking about 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds. And then the mother being held for 4 months despite advocacy and despite no charge being filed because there was actually no evidence she'd done anything at all wrong. And yet the administration said, we grabbed her and we're going to hold on to her. And that's just one example. We have due process violated time and time again, where people are grabbed off the street by this administration, by agents who are wearing no identification of whether they're ICE or CBP, not wearing individual identifiers, wearing face masks. This is fascism because there's no accountability and people are being grabbed without due process, often prevented from having access to a lawyer, often prevented from having access to family, often rapidly moved and unwillingness to even tell the families where they are located. There is a comment
I want to ask you on that note. This week, the Vice President said, in regards to much of this criticism, that if Democrats want to end that immigration enforcement, they should beat us at the ballot box, and that these attacks about fascism are putting people in harm's way. What did you make of the Vice President saying
they
that?
should quit being fascist if they don't want to be called fascist? That's what I make of that. They are breaking constitutional boundaries. Due process is the right that keeps you and me and everybody safe in this country. It belongs to everyone resident in the country because the government doesn't know who's a citizen or not, and the Constitution lays it out that any person present has these rights of due process. That's what keeps tyranny at bay, a strongman authoritarian government at bay. So if they don't want to be defined as operating outside the Constitution, they should quit operating outside the Constitution.
Let's move to the situation in Venezuela. Last weekend, the U.S. military captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. This week, the Senate passed a war powers measure that would prevent further military involvement in Venezuela without congressional approval. This was a procedural vote, so can you explain what it does and what's next?
Yes, his first step was to discharge the war powers resolution from committee, so it's now on the calendar. We hope next week to be able to have an actual vote on it. But we were joined by 5 Republicans, and the essence of that is it's an indicator that they're probably likely to vote with us on the war powers resolution itself. This is another constitutional issue. The Constitution says that the power of war belongs to Congress. Our founders said, you know, the chief executives are tempted to use power in ways that should never be used, military force in ways that should never be used. And furthermore, they didn't even trust to have a standing army. So they said, this power has to be in the hands of the people. The representatives elected from around the country have to come together and say, yes, this merits military action. That's what the Constitution says. And that's what the War Powers Resolution says, is you cannot keep using power, military power in Venezuela unless you get an authorization passed by Congress. It's called an AUMF, or Authorization for the Use of Military Force, kind of the modern version of declaration of war.
The Vice President and the President have called the War Powers Act itself unconstitutional. What's your reaction to their characterization?
So they're asserting what they call a fancy name, Article 2 power. What do they mean when they say Article 2 power? They mean that Article 2 of the Constitution lays out that the President is the Commander-in-Chief. And from that, they derive that as Commander-in-Chief, he can do anything he wants. Well, if he can do anything he wants, then why does it say in the Constitution that the power to declare war, authorize war, rests in Congress? Why did our founders talk about how important that power was? Because they did not, in putting the President in the role of Commander-in-Chief, they were not conveying unlimited power to use those forces unless Congress authorized it. Now, with Iraq, Congress did authorize it. That was a critical discussion. And in fact, what happened at the time was the administration misled Congress about weapons of mass destruction. And so they had all kinds of evidence that there were these weapons being developed by Iraq, they were being hidden by Iraq, the international force couldn't find them. They lied to Congress to get that authorization. This time around, the president's again lying to the American people, saying this action in Venezuela is all about interdicting drugs. But that's not true. This was all about regime change and our oil companies taking control of Venezuelan oil. If it had been about drugs, they wouldn't have interdicted drugs headed to Europe. And they said they were interdicting to catch fentanyl, but fentanyl is made in Mexico, so a little error of the facts on their part. And you wouldn't have pardoned the chief kingpin from Honduras who built the cocaine superhighway that delivered 400 tons of cocaine to the United States, devastating millions of American families. If it was about drugs, it was about regime change, it was about oil companies.
It's an uncertain and chaotic time right now in Portland, in Oregon, and the whole nation. What's your message for people? What do you have for the community?
This is so important this year that we exercise our power as citizens to reclaim our nation. There are authoritarian forces at work under the administration, including firing the referees like the inspector generals, appointing loyalists as head of departments, trying to put the military in the street, striving to rig the next election with a national voter database and gerrymandering of congressional districts. These forces constitute a real threat to our democratic republic, and that means that we have to respond in two ways. One is we need to protest. That's why the No Kings protest was so important. So people understand that this is not normal. It's not within the range of the constitutional framework of our nation. And second, we have to have a fierce rebuke of this authoritarian effort by President Trump and his cronies in the next election.
Senator Jeff Merkley, thank you so much
Yeah,
for your
you're
time
so
this morning.
welcome. Thank you.